I walked into the room with my shoulders tightened, my heart pounding in my chest. Every eye turned toward me, but no greetings came. "Karen, I see you still had the nerve to show up," Meredith sneered, her words dropping the temperature in the room a few more degrees. My 8-year-old daughter Lily squeezed my hand as I realized the family I once belonged to was gathered here to cast me out once and for all. I walked into the room with my shoulders tightened, my heart beating loudly in my chest. The room wasn't big, but the cold overhead light and the ticking of the antique wall clock made it feel like I was standing in the center of a courtroom. Every eye turned toward me. No greetings, no friendly gestures. The air was thick, like they had gathered here to cast me out of their lives once and for all. The long table was covered in a white cloth, dark leather chairs lined up neatly on both sides, more fitting for a dispute than a memorial. I gripped the hand of my 8-year-old daughter, Lily. She looked up at me, her clear gray eyes reflecting the worry I was trying to hide. I smiled at her, stiffly, but just enough to keep her world from crumbling. "Karen, I see you still had the nerve to show up." The voice dropped the temperature in the room a few more degrees. That was Meredith, my sister, her blonde hair pinned up, lipstick a shade of red straight out of a 1950s fashion magazine, but her words were as sharp as a blade wrapped in silk. "Guess you didn't get the memo that Dad cut you out of the will last year." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had expected this reception, though my heart never quite got used to being cast aside by my own blood. I quietly pulled out the chair for Lily and sat next to her, the only seat left farthest from the center of the table. At that moment, my uncle, Martin, leaned back in his chair and let out a dry laugh like he'd just finished watching a dark comedy. "I thought you'd at least have the decency to stay away," he said without looking at me. "Or are you here to say a final sorry to your father? Though it's far too late for that." Lily curled inward, her tiny hands clutching the hem of her dress. I laid my hand over hers gently, soothing, but my eyes remained alert, scanning every look from the people around us. Those who once called me niece, sister, daughter. Now they looked at me like a stranger, like my presence alone was an offense to this family. I couldn't remember the last time someone called me sister. Ever since I left the house after my marriage fell apart, I had been erased from every holiday, every phone call, every family story. Meredith told the tale of me leaving like it was a stain she had to bear, a burden she had to carry because I abandoned our father. No one asked why. No one cared to know why I left with Lily when she was just 3 months old, and I hadn't even recovered from my C-section. I looked around the room, once our father's small library. Old photos still hung on the walls, but I was missing from everyone. They had cropped me out of the frames and out of memory. Meredith was whispering something into her husband's ear, the man who'd never once welcomed me. Next to them sat her cousins, watching like they already knew the ending, just waiting for their happily ever after. The door opened. My father's personal lawyer, Mr. Donald, stepped in, carrying a brown leather briefcase and a thick file. The sound of his shoes was slow, but certain. He nodded to everyone, but when his eyes met mine, he paused longer. Not with sympathy, but consideration. Everyone in the room thought they knew what was coming. They believed I had come to confirm once and for all that I had nothing. No message, no memento, no explanation. But they didn't know I wasn't here to beg. I was here because my daughter had said something to me yesterday. "Mom, if Grandpa still remembers you, you need to know. Let's go, okay?" And I said yes, not for my father, for Lily. Because she deserved to know the truth. Whether it was a long, heavy silence or a surprise no one saw coming, I breathed slowly, still holding Lily's hand. Across the table, Meredith smirked in triumph. But I kept my gaze on Mr. Donald, who had just placed the briefcase on the table and was beginning to open it. I didn't know what was waiting for me. But somehow I knew this story wasn't over. Meredith crossed her legs, arms folded like she was chairing a shareholders' meeting, not her father's will reading. Her tailored gray suit and sparkling wristwatch shimmered under the overhead lights. A silent announcement. She was the chosen one. The rightful heir, the only Jefferson name their father still acknowledged. I glanced at Lily, still sitting quietly beside me, her small hands neatly on her lap, I scanning the unfamiliar room. She said nothing, but I could feel the tension in her. The way she tilted slightly toward me, seeking safety, made me squeeze her hand tighter. No matter what anyone in that room believed, I was still Lily's mother. And if I had to endure being rejected once more, at least this time, I wouldn't go through it alone. "No one needs you here," Karen, Uncle Martin suddenly said, his voice raspy, like someone who had lived too long on bitterness and cigarettes. "Your father was clear. You're out of the will. You know that, right?" Or are you still clinging to some fantasy he'd forgive you? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. Words like that didn't hit the way they used to. Uncle Martin, like many in that room, clung to an old image of me. Karen the weak. Karen the defiant. Karen who walked out on the family for a marriage Dad never approved of. They didn't know or didn't want to know that the man I once loved was gone, leaving me alone with a baby and sleepless nights at my desk job. I didn't leave to betray. I left to survive. Beside him sat Aunt Celia, a woman who hadn't called me once in a decade but sent birthday cards to Meredith every year. She looked at me, eyes narrowing, not with anger, not with disgust, but pity. Cold, sharp pity that cut deeper than any insult. I turned away, determined not to let that gaze burn into my mind. Some people really don't know shame, Meredith said, her voice calm but calculated. Why are you here, Karen? To hear the lawyer confirm, again, that Dad erased you from his life? I lifted my head and looked straight at her. I'm here because I have every right to be. Whether you like it or not, I'm still his daughter. The room went still for a beat. A few people glanced at one another, like they'd just been splashed with cold water. My response wasn't loud, wasn't angry, but clear enough for them to understand. I wasn't here to beg. I was here because I belonged. I sat in silence, listening to the wind slip through the window crack, mixing with a soft scratch of fountain pen on paper as Mr. Donald flipped through his notes. Everyone waited, not to remember but to confirm positions, shares, entitlements. It felt like a private auction where people were valued by loyalty and how well they played their roles. A soft chuckle came from the left side of the table. It was Edward, my cousin. The one who once built sandcastles with me on Cape Cod when I was 10, now laughing like I was the family's running joke. Still think you have a chance? He muttered, just loud enough for Lily to hear. She turned to me, her little face suddenly steely. It wasn't fear I saw. It was disappointment. Not in me, but in the world. She was beginning to see more clearly. Lily, I whispered, gently brushing her hair. It's okay. Just stay with me, all right? She nodded, lips pressed tightly. She was stronger than her 8 years. And I knew, if there was any reason I hadn't fallen apart in front of those eyes, it was because of her. At the head of the table, Mr. Donald tapped his pen lightly against the folder. His calm voice filled the room. If everyone is ready, I'd like to begin. Everyone straightened up. Meredith folded her hands like she was ready for a victory speech. Uncle Martin leaned back, eyes narrow like reading between the lines. Aunt Celia pulled a handkerchief from her purse as if bracing for some emotional crescendo. And me, I just held Lily's hand, because I knew my name wouldn't be in the opening lines. But like every room that once turned its back on me, I had learned to walk in, head held high, and wait to see who feared the truth more than I ever did. I used to think that if I stayed silent long enough, the whispers behind my back would fade away. But as the years passed, they only grew louder, clinging to me like smoke that refused to clear. My family never cared why I left. They already had a story. I was the daughter who didn't know sacrifice, the one who abandoned her father when he needed her most. The selfish sister who ran away from family duty. That story, crafted by Meredith, amplified by Uncle Martin, gradually became the unchallenged truth no one bothered to question. They didn't know, or didn't want to know, that I once came back. 3 months after leaving my husband, I brought Lily to my father's door, carrying her in one arm, a single suitcase in the other. I remember it was drizzling that day, not enough to soak my hair, but enough to chill the air. I knocked, hoping that no matter how angry he was, my father would still open the door. He used to say family is the last place that won't shut its doors on you. But that day he did. The old oak door closed, cold and silent, like the period at the end of a sentence. I stood under the porch for nearly 2 hours. Lily was 6 months old, crying nonstop from hunger and cold. It was my father's neighbor, Mrs. Graham, who finally came out, pressed an umbrella and a business card for a single mother's center into my hand. I walked away as darkness fell, without looking back. From that day forward, I understood that if I wanted to survive, I had to learn how to no longer need anyone from that house. I rented a small apartment in the suburbs of Newark. My first job was a night shift cashier at a convenience store. Then I slowly moved into part-time bookkeeping for an insurance company. Everything was slow, but peaceful. I did everything I could for Lily. From mending torn sweaters to saving every spare coin to buy her books. Our life wasn't glamorous, but at least it didn't include accusations or contemptuous stares. Sometimes on quiet nights, I still thought about my father. Not out of anger, but because I still hoped. Hoped that maybe he had come to understand something, or at least wondered why I had left. He was the only one who ever taught me how to entangle a fishing line, how to arrange lilies so they wouldn't wilt. He was the only one who ever truly listened when I said I wanted to study interior design instead of accounting. But after I married someone he disapproved of minus a free it all collapsed. Emotional and impulsive minus it all collapsed. He didn't like who I chose, but what he never understood was that I chose to break free from a family where emotions had to be polished before being presented. After that marriage, when the man who once painted me pictures turned into the man who yelled at me daily, I knew I had to stop. But when I came back with our daughter, my father did too. Only one person knew the whole story. Mr. Donald, our longtime family lawyer. Last year, when he called to verify some documents related to a scholarship fund, I asked him directly, did my father ever mention me? He hesitated, then said softly, I believe he was still following your path. That answer didn't erase the years I'd been shut out, but it was enough to keep a flicker of hope alive that maybe somewhere deep down, a part of the old father still remained. And maybe that's why I came to the will reading today, not for the inheritance, not to fight for anything, but to see if, in his final moment, he left something, not the house, not the retirement fund, but a line, a message, something to prove I was never completely forgotten. I looked around the room at the faces waiting. They thought I came to beg, but what they didn't know was that the only thing I ever wanted was something money couldn't buy. The truth, and I had a feeling that somehow that truth was getting very close. Mr. Donald set the folder down on the table, his eyes sweeping the room as if weighing the air. The room fell silent. The only sound was the soft rustle of pages between the tension. I could hear every heartbeat in my chest. Steady but fragile, as if one deep breath could shatter everything. The last will and testament of Mr. Harold Jefferson, he began, his voice deep but steady, like someone who'd read hundreds of wills, but still respected every word. Meredith leaned forward slightly, hands neatly folded, eyes gleaming with triumph. Next to her, her husband Brandon pulled out his phone under the table, probably texting the architect they'd spoken with last week. They had already been planning renovations to the main house before our father even passed. I, Harold Jefferson, Mr. Donald continued, being of sound mind and judgment, do hereby divide my estate as follows. I heard the words, but they felt distant. Each sentence hammered deeper into the reality I had suspected. My name was not there. To my eldest daughter, Meredith Jefferson, I leave the entire main house and the adjoining property, along with all furnishings and valuables contained within. Meredith raised an eyebrow, saying nothing, but I saw the subtle curve of her lips, a silent but unmistakable victory. To my brother, Mr. Martin Jefferson, Mr. Donald went on, I leave the lakeside property, including ownership of the cabin and the fishing boat. Uncle Martin nodded, his expression unchanged, but I knew he was pleased. He loved that lake more than anything except control. To my nephew Edward, Mr. Donald paused to flip a page. I leave the vintage car collection, along with all titles and related accessories. I looked at Edward, my cousin, who hadn't even looked at me at the funeral. Now he stroked his chin, nodding like it had all been predetermined. I said nothing, but each word, each sentence, was confirming what I had braced myself for. I had no place in this will, not even a line, not a note, not a goodbye. And then, the line came, like a clean cut, slicing through what little hope remained. And as previously stated, Mr. Donald slowed his reading, my youngest daughter, Karen Jefferson, shall receive no portion of this estate. The room went dead quiet. No one spoke right away. But a heartbeat later, Meredith let out a soft snort of laughter. Told you, she whispered to Brandon, but loud enough for me to hear. Uncle Martin shook his head, casting a look of mock pity toward me. Takes a special kind of person to turn their back on their own father, he said, with that half-minose joking tone he always used when speaking of me. Like I was some side note, and worthy of discussion. Lily sat beside me, not fully grasping the words, but feeling the heavy silence all around. She turned and whispered softly, Mom. I gripped her hand tighter, holding back the emotion. I had known this was coming. I had played this scene out in my head 100 times. But nothing prepares you for seeing your name officially erased from your father's life in front of your entire family without feeling something fracture. I took a deep breath, eyes fixed on the wood grain of the table where the light struck in almost hypnotic swirls. Around me, murmurs began. Meredith was saying something to Brandon about starting basement renovations early. Edward was already on the phone. I caught snippets like move the cars into the garage this weekend. No one spoke to me. No one asked what I was thinking. They had ended this long ago. I was just the late arrival to a play that had closed years before. But what they didn't know was this. I hadn't come to claim anything. I came to listen, to confirm, and if needed to close the last unfinished chapter in my heart. I didn't need the house. I didn't need the things. What I needed was the truth. I hadn't yet decided whether to get up or quietly wait for everyone to leave when Lily suddenly turned to Mr. Donald. Her voice wasn't loud, wasn't rushed, but clear enough to freeze the entire room. You forgot the video he recorded. Everyone turned. Meredith, Uncle Martin, Edward, Brandon and his wife, even Mr. Donald furrowed his brows. I looked at my daughter, my palms suddenly cold. Lily, what are you talking about? I whispered almost breathless. She didn't look at me. Lily's eyes stayed on Mr. Donald, calm and direct, strangely composed for an 8-year-old. She reached into her small backpack, pulled out a slightly wrinkled white envelope, sealed carefully with brown tape. On it in familiar bold letters for Mr. Donald, only if it gets ugly. I nearly choked. I recognized that handwriting instantly. Lily, where did you get that? I asked, voice trembling, my hand shaking as I gently touched the envelope. Lily turned to me, her eyes clear and steady. The last time I visited Grandpa, she said, he gave it to me and said to keep it safe. He told me to give it to Mr. Donald if people forgot something important. No one said a word now. Meredith tried to maintain her composure, but I could see her lips pressed tightly together, her face growing pale. Uncle Martin leaned forward and Edward slowly set his phone down on the table. Mr. Donald took the envelope with both hands, his expression filled with caution, as if he were holding something more valuable than any legal document. He glanced at me, then at Lily, before carefully opening the envelope. Inside was a small black USB drive and a folded note, also handwritten, signed at the bottom. He skimmed the lines briefly, then looked around the room. When he spoke, his voice no longer carried the tone of a lawyer doing his job. It sounded like someone holding a secret too heavy to keep. This is a video recording made by Mr. Harold Jefferson prior to finalizing his last will. He left instructions that it should only be played if the reading of the will became contentious. He paused, then added, and I believe today meets that condition. Meredith let out a short, bitter laugh. This is absurd, she said, her voice higher than usual. A video of unknown origin has no legal standing. Uncle Martin jetted his chin. There's no proof it wasn't altered. Harold never mentioned this to me. But Mr. Donald was already on his feet, walking to the laptop on the side table. He plugged in the USB and within seconds a single video file opened. On the screen appeared my father, Harold, seated at his desk in the familiar study. He wore the light brown cardigan I had given him years ago. His silver hair was neatly combed and his eyes looked straight into the camera. The room went completely still. I felt the world freeze as my father's voice came through, hoarse but clear. If you're watching this, Karen, it means things didn't go as I hoped. And I'm sorry. I turned to stone. His voice continued slow and steady. I know you're being left out of the will. And I agreed to it at the time, thinking it was the right thing to do. But the closer I got to the end of my life, the more I reconsidered. And I realized I was wrong. Wrong to believe what others told me. Wrong not to ask you once why you left. I couldn't hold back the tears. Beside me, Lily clutched my hand tighter as if she'd always known this moment would come and had waited until I was strong enough to face it. I met Lily, he continued, his expression softening. She didn't say much, but when I asked her about you, she said, Mom is the safest place in the world. The murmurs behind me faded. I heard only his voice. The voice of a man I believed would never understand me, now admitting fault, calling my name with a tenderness I thought had vanished forever. On the screen, my father's face, Harold Jefferson's face, looked both foreign and heartbreaking familiar. He no longer had the stern expression I remembered. Instead, he looked gently tired, like someone finally releasing a weight he had carried too long. Karen, he said, his voice rougher and deeper than I remembered. If you're watching this, then the will didn't go as planned and maybe that's my fault. I felt frozen. My hands were numb from gripping Lily so tightly. The room was silent, pulled into every word echoing from the tiny speaker. For years I let pride and anger drown out everything, he went on. I believed Meredith when she said you left to avoid responsibility. I trusted Martin when he said you'd turned your back on the family. I didn't ask. I didn't investigate. I just closed the door. And because of that, I lost you. Those words cut like a blade. But the kind that peels away the layers I'd built to survive since walking out of that house. When you came back, holding Lily, he said, I remember looking out the window. I saw you standing in the rain. I saw the look in your eyes. And I still didn't open the door. Because I thought I was right. I thought you owed me an apology. I heard Meredith shift slightly in her seat. Brandon lowered his head. Uncle Martin crossed his arms, his lips pressed into a hard line. They were trying to stay composed, but none of them could ignore the truth unraveling in my father's voice. And now, looking back, he continued staring straight into the camera like he was speaking directly to me. I see it clearly. You were the bravest one in this family. You left when there was no other choice. You protected your daughter. You stood on your own after everyone turned away. You didn't come back for money. You came back because you deserved to hear what I should have said a long time ago. I couldn't stop the tears. They fell silently. Not in a rush, but steady. Like every year of pain was finally being washed away. I'm proud of you, Karen, he said, his voice dropping low, thick with remorse. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for making you believe you weren't enough, weren't worthy, weren't loved. The truth is, you made it through all of it with your heart intact. Lily looked up at me, her clear eyes pulling at something deep in my chest. I wanted to hold her close and cry, but I stayed still. My father wasn't done. And because of that, he said, I revised my will. One final version sent directly to Mr. Donald, fully executed and legally binding. The air in the room thickened. I leave this entire house to you, Karen, he said, along with my savings account, retirement stocks, and a scholarship fund for Lily. I want her to have the chances you didn't. I heard someone inhale sharply. Maybe Edward, maybe Meredith. Uncle Martin leaned forward, clearly about to object. But Mr. Donald raised a hand to keep him quiet. I know this will upset some people, my father said, as though reading their reactions through time. But I'm not doing this for fairness. I'm doing this for truth. And the truth is, you deserve every good thing I can leave behind. The screen began to fade to black. But before it disappeared, he looked into the lens one last time, his gaze softening. Exactly like the way he used to look at me when I was little and scared of summer storms. You are my daughter, he said gently. And I love you. I always have. I just didn't know how to show it. Live well, for yourself and for your daughter. Don't let them take your heart again. The screen went dark. No music, no effects. Just silence, deep and heavy, like a final confession. I sat there, still clutching Lily's hand. Inside me was a storm, not of rage or regret, but of something I hadn't let myself believe in for years. My father had heard, my father had seen, and in the end, my father chose me. The room sat in thick silence after the screen went black. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Everyone seemed frozen between two worlds. One filled with the cold calculations they'd just been discussing, and the other where the truth had just thundered in like an unexpected winter storm. Meredith was the first to break the silence. Her chair scraped back suddenly, screeching across the floor. Her face was pale, but her eyes still clung to the last shreds of pride. No way, she said, her voice shaking but clipped. He never changed the will. I took care of him. I was with him until the very end. No one replied. Brandon stood up more slowly, trying to place a hand on her shoulder to calm her. But Meredith shoved him off without a word. She stormed toward the door without even glancing at me. The door slammed shut behind her, leaving behind a cold emptiness in the space where she had been. I didn't feel triumphant. Just quiet. Uncle Martin, still seated, stared at the USB as if it was something that could bend reality. He turned to Mr. Donald, voice low and intense. How do I know that video was real? He could have recorded it before he started losing his mind. Mr. Donald calmly sat back down, both hands resting lightly on the table. The video was recorded 2 weeks before Mr. Harold passed away. It is time-stamped and legally notarized. Additionally, I was present when he signed the revised final will. Uncle Martin clenched his jaw, clearly trying to find an angle to argue, but there was nothing to hold on to. Everything was legal. Every word my father had spoken in the video and every portion of the estate that had been reassigned had been thoroughly processed within the bounds of the law. It was strange that a man like him, so quiet, so disciplined, chose to end it all with such a dramatic twist. Edward, my cousin, who had once looked at me with thinly veiled contempt when I walked in, now sat frozen like a statue. I glanced over at him and saw his face caught in a storm of emotion, meanest part disbelief, part confusion that my father, the man they all assumed had taken their side, had ultimately chosen mine. I didn't think he'd actually do it, Edward mumbled, unsure who he was speaking to. Then he stood, grabbed his coat, and quietly left the room. No one stopped him. A few other relatives followed. No comments, no farewells. Just silent backs walking away, leaving behind empty chairs like quiet witnesses to a truth that could no longer be denied. I stayed seated, still holding Lily's hand. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her relief. She'd held on to this secret longer than I realized. And now she could finally exhale. Only the three of us remained in the wide room. Me, Lily, and Mr. Donald. Mr. Donald gently closed the folder, his voice deeper now and softer. The revised will is going to be sent to each involved party, along with documents confirming its legal validity. There will be some paperwork to sign, but everything is already arranged. I nodded, unable to find any words. I thought I'd feel pain or anger or the urge to scream at the world for all the years I was left behind. But I didn't. What I felt was peace. Not the hollow kind of silence I used to endure during long nights in that cramped apartment while Lily cried. Not the awkward hush at family gatherings where no one spoke to me. This was a quietness filled with resolution. The kind that only arrives when the truth finally speaks. I looked around the room where my father once wrote meticulous notes, fixed the old wall clock, folded paper airplanes for me when I was little. This room, which I thought no longer belonged to me, had opened its doors again. This time, not to shut me out, but to welcome me back. Thank you, I said to Mr. Donald, my voice soft but firm, not just for doing the right thing, but for listening to him. He offered a faint smile, stood up, and left the room with footsteps as light as the change that had just taken place. Lily looked at me, her eyes shimmering with something I hadn't yet put into words. Maybe pride, maybe relief, or maybe a new kind of belief that no matter how long it takes, the truth always finds its way. I stayed seated as if my mind hadn't yet caught up to everything that had just happened. I had been given the house, once a place of rejection. The savings account, the college fund for Lily, the entire estate everyone believed would go to Meredith, was now mine. But what I walked away with from that reading was worth far more than property. It was recognition. The revised will goes into effect immediately, Mr. Donald confirmed once more, noticing I hadn't spoken. If you need any legal assistance, I'm here to help. I nodded, managing a faint smile in place of words. But my throat was tight. All my life I had longed to hear one simple thing from my father. That he believed in me. That I was worthy of love. And now I had that. Not in words alone, but in undeniable action. A video. An apology. A rewritten will. All of it was my father's way of saying, I saw you. I looked down at Lily. She was still sitting quietly. Her small hand in mine. Her wide eyes taking in the dust-laced corners of the room. Like she was trying to remember every detail. You did good, Lily, I whispered, my voice trembling with emotion. Thank you. She tilted her head and smiled. I just wanted you to hear him. I brushed her hair gently. You kept a really big secret. Lily nodded proudly. He said to wait for the right moment. I thought today was it. I couldn't help but laugh through my tears. My daughter, just 8 years old, small and silent, had carried an entire truth for months. Only to bring it into the light when no one could deny it anymore. Not Meredith, not Uncle Martin. No one could take that truth from her now. I stood up, the weight on my shoulders falling away. No more shame, no more fear or second-guessing. I moved slowly across the room, glancing at each chair, remembering every look that once held contempt. Now those eyes were gone, leaving behind a silence big enough to echo the truth. As we stepped outside the grand doors, the setting sun bathed the stone steps in gold. A cool breeze passed by and I shivered, not from cold rejection, but from the gentleness of spring's first wind. A breeze that hinted at something new. I paused at the top of the steps, gazing at the house that had once only symbolized pain. Today, it was no longer a place I'd been cast out of. It was where my father called me home, to his final will and his final words. Do you want to see Grandpa's room? I asked Lily. She squeezed my hand, eyes sparkling. Do you? I thought for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, but not today. Today I just want to go home with you. We stepped off the porch together. I looked back once more, then exhaled deeply. Everything that needed to be said, he had said. Everything that needed to be done, he had done. The rest was mine to carry. The small car waited by the curb, sunlight glinting off the windshield. I opened the door for Lily, and she climbed in with a lightness that said she had laid down a heavy burden. I walked around to the driver's side and slid into my seat. As the engine turned over, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes still misty but no longer sad. Study free. I once walked away from that house in tears and loneliness. Today I walked away with my daughter, the truth behind me, and the future ahead. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one left behind. I was the one who had been seen, and finally I could just be me, no more proving required.